Dad, I love this picture of you and Mom. When was it taken?
In Madrid, Spain in 1966, before we got married. After military service in France, I came back to Spain, where I met your mother. About a year or so later, we married. I climbed the ladder of corporate ladder from say the end of 1966 all the way to about 1980. By 1980, I'd learned the ropes of business and realized the American dream, and firmly believing, erroneously as it were, that tomorrow will be always better than yesterday. Providence abruptly shifted gears on me. My world collapsed, and I found myself on the brink of bankruptcy.
And I'd say it was about this time in 1990 that my father started doing business in Russia. After Russia, he was never the same again. Once upon a time, my mother was a happy homemaker. She married at 19 and never worked outside the home a day in her life. My father took really good care of her. Her name is Stella. Now, about 8 years ago, my father began chasing another woman who bankrupted him. My mother took on odd jobs. Eventually, she got a career in real estate. And throughout, my mother still supported my father, even though, to this day, he is still chasing the other woman. And to tell you the truth, at this point, she's getting really tired of it. The other woman's name? Her name is Justice.
The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. Oyez, oyez, oyez. All persons having business before the Honorable Supreme Court of the United States are admonished to draw near and give their attention to the court that is now sitting. God save the United States and this honorable court.
I like to take a picture of myself doing this idiotic documentary.
This is my father, Pierre Quintana, back in December of 1992. This is a suite he stayed at in the Hotel Metropole in Moscow. That's Jim Newkirk opening the door for him.
Willkommen auf der Suite.
Okay.
The Russian.
Okay.
And that's Ed Shapiro, their company's president. Their company name was Semtek International, and they would soon be making the deal of a lifetime with Mercury, the commercial arm of the Russian space agency.
Hey, let me show you a refrigerator. Well, I was not a steel trader. I was dealing in commodities and all kind of things. And at some point in time, I wanted to find new sources of supply. This was about the time that the Soviet Union was breaking apart, and they were known for making cheap steel, commercial quality grade, and I thought I should go there and try to find new sources. So I went on my own about 2 or 3 times, and at some point I was approached by a fellow from Naval Intelligence who asked me to give information of whatever I learned during my trips, the people I saw, the sites I visited, and so forth. And I was very reluctant at the beginning to participate in this, but after a while I befriended the guy. We used to play at home tennis and so forth. And when I ran out of money after a while and he offered to finance a trip, I said, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. And so I did, and click the camera. I visited a place where they manufactured the hull for the Russian nuclear submarine, which is made of titanium. And so if you look at the picture, you can tell the thickness of the material, you can tell the bend, you can tell all sorts of things, which they thought was very, very useful. And so my life as an accidental spy commenced at that point.
Hey, let me show you a refrigerator.
My father wasn't there for the signing of the Semtek Mercury joint venture. As you see here, he got sick.
Nurse Ed is taking care of patient Pierre, who has the flu. Pierre is running a temperature and feels lousy. Pierre, say goodbye.
But it wasn't the flu.
Later, Audrey James was uncovered as a mole for the KGB, and it's well known that he gave entire files to the Russians, including the name of informants, American and Russians. Some of them I think were executed. So I cannot prove it, but I'm rather sure that I was poisoned.
Where do you think you got poisoned? Like at what point?
I don't know. I somehow have the feeling that it may have happened on a trip, a real trip that I took from St. Petersburg to Moscow. And I think the people responsible for it are people that I met in connection with business there, where the man, his wife spoke perfect French. His secretary spoke perfect English. His driver was big and bulky, and he drove this big black car. They had the word KGB on their forehead. So I think it's a pretty good guess that they tried to put me in the train, and it may have been the tea. I cannot tell. Yeah. But what I know is just in a matter of hours later, I started not feeling well.
The mystery illness landed him in the Kremlin hospital, where, according to doctors, his survival would be as likely as winning the lottery.
Yeah, please. You're not going to leave it here in Moscow.
The sounds you are hearing are the sounds of my father, gasping for breath and struggling to survive. No one knows how that got taped. Somehow it did.
We made the deal of a lifetime. Meanwhile, I was slipping between life and death. This is a picture of me. It was taken at some point in time after December 20th or so. You don't know that I'm in a coma, but I am. You probably think I could be sleeping. And while this is happening, my partners are signing a deal called protocol. See, what you're looking at is a picture of the Russian executive who signed the deal, the protocol. It was done in the suite that I occupied with one of my partners, where the event which led to my being hospitalized started. The deal was about a satellite called Luch.
At the firm of Engstrom, Lipscomb & Lack, who are representing Mr. Quintana in a case known as Semtek versus Lockheed.
First of all, let me explain to you what the business was all about. Well, the first satellite we were interested in, one that Lockheed essentially stole from us. The main purpose of the satellite was to communicate with the space station there. It was located at 16 degrees west, just slightly east of Mauritania or Senegal, right about here. Now, the zone of coverage of the satellite would be the eastern coast of the United States and
this
part of the
area
Midwest.
Here.
Yeah. You can imagine the very large surface covered. You had the entire continent of South America.
A large portion of Europe.
All of Europe, all of Africa, and a great part of the Middle East, obviously. Primarily for the use of television signals to and from those areas covered by the footprint. The beauty of the deal is that the cost was, in essence, paid by the Kremlin. In other words, the cost of launch, cost of manufacture, and there was the deal. You had an asset in space already, which had cost you nothing. We had a joint venture with the Russian company so that they would profit equally.
Eventually, my father came out of the coma, and he recuperated back at home in Connecticut. About a year later, another contract with Mercury was signed. Then a few months later, the Semtek Mercury joint venture gradually slipped into its own mysterious coma. What was clear is that by 1994, Semtek found itself tangled in a web of deceit, as someone else suddenly claimed they had rights to the bird. Even though Mercury's president Severin had signed contracts with Semtek, at some point he obviously found himself in a bit of a bind, as he placed a call to one of the Semtek partners.
And this is what he said verbatim. Millman and his companies are bandits. I have told them to their face what I think of them. I have told Millman to his face that I think he's a gangster. But I cannot get rid of him. We must work together. And he went on to say, Millman is dealing with Martin and Marietta, and I have to deal with them. Millman had called. He called Jim Newkirk, that's one of my partners, at his house, and he screamed on the telephone, "I have decrees from Yeltsin to show that I have the deal and you don't. I am going to go with my attorneys and meet with you."
Hosting what could be a billion-dollar deal between the American company Transworld Communications and the Russian TASS Telecom. The Russians provided the satellites developed by the military to track low-flying spacecraft. The Americans provided the cash, several $100 million.
Monopolies are not the order of the day.
Millman was an agent of Lockheed, but they disguised the relationship as if he were a principal on his own right, although he was not, and they kept on giving money under the table. And so to avoid the terrible, terrible things that happen when one violates the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is what Lockheed did.
It shouldn't come as a shock that Lockheed has violated the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. They've done it many times before. The very reason the act even exists is because of Lockheed's past indiscretions in the Middle East. It wasn't long before Semtek received the infamous July 27th kiss-off fax from Severin denying that they ever had a deal. Later at meetings with Millman and Lockheed executives, it became clear that Severin was under their control, and he acted like he never even met these Semtek people before in his life.
And so at some point, Lawrence Fedak, the Associate General Counsel of Lockheed, spoke to Jim Newkirk, and it was agreed upon that both Jim Newkirk and Jim Cronfeld, who died, by the way, in the meantime of cancer, of pancreatic cancer 3 years ago, he said, "You know what, show me what you have. Show me your paperwork as a Russian, and you know, we are ethical people."
Lockheed Martin has this corporate ethics website for its employees, and they have a 1-800 number too that they can call if they find themselves in an ethical bind. Business without ethics is not the kind of business we want to be in. Ethics gives all our efforts a solid foundation and makes working with and at Lockheed Martin a pleasure.
So in essence, by giving the papers to Fedak, we were entering the lines then, except we did not know. At that point, we enrolled the support of Congressman Marty Meehan of Massachusetts, who wrote to the chairman of Martin Marietta. His name is Norman Augustine.
If you go to your local bookstore, you can find a book about Norm. They paint him as the patron saint of corporate ethics. I'm not denying Norm's sainthood, but considering that he gave the go-ahead to jump into business with Richard Millman of Transworld Communications, knowing full well that a prior investigative report revealed, among many other things, that Millman had filed 3 fraudulent bankruptcies, had been disbarred, and was associating with Arabs of ill repute, mainly Sheikh Kamal Adam, implicated and fined in the BCCI scandal, the biggest banking scandal ever. Now, it surprises me that someone of such ethical, high standards as Norm would jump into bed with a guy like Millman. As far as the Bishop's investigative report, well, someone asked them to destroy the document. Considering the evidence, Norm's bestseller just may be Confessions.
Augustine responded by saying, "You know, we have nothing to do with this whole affair and our Russian satellite business." He said, "You know, we put Semtek on our list and sort of tell them not to call us, we'll call them," okay, kind of thing, okay, which is kind of hilarious. By early 1995, we decided we had to sue the Russians, which is precisely what Lockheed wanted, to send us on the long road to Siberia and sue the Russians. Sue the Russian we did. We did so towards the end of 1995. 4 years later, we got a judgment for $380 million plus interest.
Mine at last.
For heaven's sakes, Jim, we've got all the evidence we need. All the evidence we need. What? What, do you want a confession from Augustine in paper? On paper? Are we stupid or what? We have to sue Martin Marietta for interference. This is what they have done, for heaven's sake. I'm just telling you, this is crazy. What are you going to do with the judgment? You want to hang it on the wall and admire like the Mona Lisa, just like that? Like if it were at the Louvre? Don't be an idiot!
At that point, they weren't going to collect a dime from the Russians. Even with a $381 million judgment, the arms of justice just don't reach that far. My father had pretty strong motivations. At that point, he had been bankrupt, lost his home of 20 years. Meanwhile, all our family stuff was in 2 storage units somewhere out on the East Coast. My dad up till then had been playing the private eye, and as bad guys tend to leave a lot of bitter people in their wake, he began to find those who were burned by Richard Millman.
The draw is that he was setting them up. I cannot give you details now, but I would like...
They talked, and Pierre began amassing evidence that showed Lockheed interfered with their business directly. Also, new evidence was gained through the lawsuit against the Russian through subpoenaed documents. And this evidence was also pointing to the fact that Lockheed directly interfered with their business. Remember that July 27th kiss-off fax from Severin? Well, my father has a binder full of drafts which were composed by Millman's own lawyers and a Lockheed executive. That's not interference. What is?
Let me just tell you that I have personally reviewed page by page over 250,000 pages, and that's a lot of pages. I think right now we have the Mount Everest of evidence.
The summit of Mount Everest, 29,028 feet high. The last great prize of the classic explorer.
Well, on or about 1995, spent a considerable amount of time pouring through a book called America's Best Lawyers to find an attorney willing to take the case. And Tom Girardi agreed to do so. I showed him what we had, and he enthusiastically said, let's go do it. His claim to fame was the Erin Brockovich story. He and his partner Walter Lack were the high-powered attorney behind the lawsuit, and it ended up with a multi-million-dollar judgment against Pacific Gas and Electric. After we hired Girardi, I did some inquiry on my own to try to find information about the involvement of Lockheed in the business in Russia. And through some contacts, I located an individual called Yuval Aviv, who operates a company called Interfor in New York. I met with him, and he's a colorful fellow. He told me that he had been essentially hired by Golda Meir to hunt down and kill a few terrorists who had been responsible for the massacre of the Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics. Aviv met with Girardi, who was very, very impressed by what the man was telling him about the prior work he had done. And they agreed that Aviv would come on board. Aviv produced a report just a few weeks later, which was incredible. We learned from it, first, that Lockheed's involvement in the whole satellite affair in Russia was done at the behest of the Pentagon, which apparently had lost some of their satellites and wanted to use existing Russian satellites to gather intelligence. The second thing we learned was that Millman, during one of his trips to Moscow, found that there was a Russian satellite that fitted the bill, but unfortunately he also learned for them that the satellite was the subject of a joint venture between that Russian company called Mercury and Semtek, that's us. And the third thing we learned is that meetings were held in Bethesda at the top level of the corporation, whereby the scheme was hatched to use Transworld as a go-between, so as to avoid plausible denial in case Transworld was caught bribing people, as he eventually did, and we know that. Everybody was absolutely excited about the news, particularly Girardi. He thought we had the goods on them, but then it occurred to me that perhaps we should check whether we may have run into some problem with the Pentagon and the U.S. government. And so one of the lawyers did an extensive legal research about the whole business of this so-called state secret privilege. And what the document essentially says at the end, concludes rather in the end, is watch it, because the government can invoke the state secret privilege and stop the lawsuit dead on its track. That's pretty much the conclusion of the report. And so there we had a very, very solid piece of evidence, and we just could not use it. We sued Lockheed in Los Angeles.
And the judge dismissed the case, applying California's 2-year statute of limitations.
What did Girardi have to say about that?
All he said is, hey, it didn't cost you any money. I always remember that. I mean, I felt like, I don't want to say that.
My father grabbed the bull by its horns and found another attorney, Andy Zepeda. Andy suggested to Girardi that they sue in Maryland, which has a 3-year statute of limitations, because new evidence revealed that's where the scheme took place. But there in Maryland, they lost on every level. They lost in the state court, appellate court, and the Maryland Supreme Court. The case was dead. But my father's not one to give up easily.
I went back to the drawing board and looked into the quote-unquote best lawyers in America, and they saw merits in taking this case to the Supreme Court.
He found a dream team of constitutional attorneys willing to take the case to the United States Supreme Court. Lawrence Tribe, Kenneth Chesbrough, Jonathan Massey, and Michael Gottesman.
Although it is very, very rare that for the Supreme Court to take a case, I think it's about 3% or so among 4,000 or 5,000 which are submitted each year. And I persuaded Girardi to hire them.
But Tom Girardi wasn't exactly thrilled about the whole idea.
He gave them a check for, I think it was $15,000. But then after the cert petition had been granted, he just refused to pay the $50,000 or $60,000 that were owed for the work at the cert petition stage. And the lawyers just quit. What is amazing here is that here we have opened the doors to hear our case, to have our case heard in the Supreme Court, which is the rarest of events. And here we are on the verge of the whole thing collapsing because the lawyers are not being paid. And the cost, never mind what was owed, there was $150,000 that had to be paid to try the case on the merits. Huh?
So now you're stuck without someone to argue for you in the Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah, I remember I was in Las Vegas with Dick and Josie, and I didn't know, I said, I'm going to strangle the guy. I never understood why he was so, I don't know. At this point, I decided to play hardball on Girardi. I sent an email to one of his lawyers asking him to have all my boxes, all my files ready so that I would pick them up, and the writing was on the wall for him. Essentially, I would sue him for malpractice. A few days later, hold and behold, he signed a check for $125,000, and everybody got back on board, except for Lawrence Tribe, who was at that point in time too busy handling the Gore-Bush affair. So Tribe resigned, and we got Mike Gottesman to do the oral argument. Normally it would have been Tribe, but Tribe had quit. I wish I had the letter from Tribe.
What was it like for you being in the
Okay.
court?
The experience of sitting in Supreme Court is somewhat amazing, but of course when your case is being heard, it's doubly extraordinary. So I brought my wife came along, my Stella came along, and my son Jean-Pierre was there, and of course my partners were there. And Justice Rehnquist opened the proceedings.
We'll hear argument now on number 99-1551, Semtek International Incorporated versus Lockheed Martin Corporation. Mr. Gottesman.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court, this is a business tort action. Your Honor's question is why? Why does California do that?
I wouldn't ask any question like that.
Okay, well, then I will.
Article 3, 41.
Dellinger, I don't think your colleague contests that. I think is that what your answer is?
That's exactly right.
That's not a good answer because they wouldn't. They would not make the words meaningless.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gottesman. The case is submitted.
4 months later, the decision came and it was unanimous, 9-0. Lockheed could not find one single judge to side with them. And as you know, a decision 9-0 is very, very rare in the High Court. You have to remember, however, that the court had not ruled on the merit. All it said is that the lawsuit had been improperly dismissed and it should be heard on the merit. So it sent it back to the state court.
It is now 2003. After both sides have spent over a year deposing witnesses and filing one motion after another, at last we have come to the end of the line. Lockheed has filed a motion for summary judgment, which means they're trying to dismiss the case. This hearing will be held on July 29th, 2003. Everything rests on this hearing. The question is, will justice elude Semtek yet again, or will she salvage the wreckage of what was once upon a time to be an American success story? Now, I've been typing mountains of faxes and memos to my father's many and varied attorneys since this all began about 8 years ago, and I sure would like to see our stuff come out of those storage units that I mentioned earlier, somewhere out on the East Coast.
Of course.
Like during the hearing, they should bring it up.
They should, yes.
At times, the waters have been really rough. It's no different now as they prepare for this upcoming July 29th hearing.
I'm going to write a memo to both of you with copies to Walter and to Tom. I'm going to put my thoughts on paper, and I hope to God that you listen. And I'm leaving.
Although, for the most part, he and his attorneys have a very healthy relationship.
I wonder if Danny's still there. That means that I don't have time to do it right now. It's not effective for me. You can send me stuff in writing, but some of the stuff, some of the stuff you've been sending me, I'm not there yet. Wait till I'm ready on Tuesday. I'm going to blow you away. There you are. It's sort of self-evident. Your Honor, the approach a lot. That seems to me that it does a lot for you as nothing for them. That's not how you win summary judgment motions. I know you can sit there. Listen, I think that's you. Listen, I've seen it with you and most of the time I've been over the right. And a lot of it is, we should have done this, we shouldn't have done that. I don't want to go through that right now. You can do it later, but right now, it's what it is, and I'm going to go forward and make the best of what we got. And I think we got a lot of stuff.
In the end, they kiss and they make up.
Andy, your fellow Christian and believer.
Today is Tuesday, July 29th, and it's 12 noon here, and it's 3 o'clock in Baltimore City, Maryland, where Andy Zepeda, it's about time, right now he's rebutting the other side argument. The problem for Andy at this point is whether he has, at long last, taken a look at the paperwork and the many memorandums and faxes that I've been sending over the last few days.
Send me your memos. I read them, but I'm not.
What is at stake really is the case, because if the judge's C agrees with Lockheed, the whole case is gone. And one thing I will not do, and of this I am sure, as I'm sure I'm sitting here and Amber is there, and you're there, I will not spend 1 minute of my time anymore. I will find a gainful employment, perhaps with you, and maybe into the movies, and tell the story and make a movies, God knows what, but that is the end of the road for me.
This documentary is just about over, and the fact remains that I'm still typing long memos to the lawyers. Oh yes, by the way, they did survive that motion for summary judgment, but that's just it. They just survived, when they could have had a decisive victory. Instead, the scorecard is pretty even. It seems that with this case, with every victory, there is defeat. Now, I'm not blaming anyone. I do believe in life that things happen for reasons far greater than we can understand. This September, there'll either be a settlement across the table or a 3-week trial. Now, my father has made a lot of predictions.
Tina, I believe we're going to win. At the end of the day, you know what? We're going to win. We're going to win big bucks. Okay? Within 3 months, God willing, and I think God wants that, they will sign a big fat check. Or my guess is anywhere between $50 to $100 million. If they don't do that, it will be of Lockheed as it was of the Nixon administration. It would be their Watergate. The thing that I fear the most is not the Lord. It's my wife. Stella has been supporting me for the last 10 long years. She went from playing tennis and doing all sorts of things with friends and shopping, and God knows she did. Stella has changed, did a magnificent thing. She sort of metamorphosized from this lady of leisure to this lady of hard labor, and hard labor she has done for the last 10 years. And so, in order to make sure that I'll incur her wrath forever, I must win. So here we are in 2003, after 7 years. We finally got our chances to have the merits of our case heard by a jury.
And after hiring an investigator to locate him and serve him a subpoena, Semtek's key witness, Leonid Wolfson, failed to show up for his deposition. It's easy to see why Lockheed wouldn't want him to show up, as Semtek had evidence that it was through Wolfson Lockheed funneled bribes of $1.2 million to Vladimir Ivanov, then commander of Russia's strategic rocket forces, who was a key player in Millman's business in Russia.
Okay, and the judge, amazingly, in open court, shortly before the end of the trial, which lasted 11 days, made what I think are very derogatory statements about the all-African American jury. He said something, that's on the record, that they have quote-unquote limited capacity, that it'd be amazing if this jury would be awake a few days later. On October 9th of 2003, after the trial, as I said, which lasted about 11 days, he dismissed the jurors and just threw out the case in about 5 minutes from the bench. He listed a laundry list of evidence where Semtek, I showed, for example, that Lockheed had destroyed documents to conceal this partnership arrangement with Transoil, that bribes were paid. I mean, there's at least, I think, about 8 instances where he lists evidence that we had pretty much made our case. But he said, under existing law for interference, want us to show that Lockheed was, quote-unquote, fully informed of the plaintiff's business affairs with the third party. And he said, well, that does not prove that they knew about your business. In short, if you think about it, it's an affront to common sense, because what it says is that if you commit wrongful acts by paying bribes to people to ingratiate yourself with them, and in the process you hurt people that you don't know, well, you're scot-free.
Because you didn't know about them.
Because you didn't know about them. Because in the midst of all this, I started feeling pain, and checked in a hospital across the street called Mercy Hospital in Baltimore, was diagnosed with an aneurysm of the aorta, and had to undergo emergency surgery just a few hours later. And that was that.
So you missed all the trial saga, huh?
Yeah. I was told by the attorneys afterwards that the trial had gone well, that our witnesses had done a good job, that the jury was very, very attentive, and that at the end they had taken an informal poll of the jurors who had said that, you know, they would have ruled for us, but they never got a chance. Once more time, we were deprived of the ability to have a jury rule on the case as the U.S. Constitution calls for, or requires, rather.
Okay, when you lost with the judge, you got your jury trial was dismissed. Is there any recourse after that, and what did your lawyers do at that point?
Well, there is recourse, which is the route we had followed before, or the route we had followed before, which is to go to the Intermediate Court of Appeal in Maryland. Except the attorneys at this point, they were discouraged. They concluded that we would never get a fair trial in Maryland with the Maryland judiciary, and so they quit, essentially. I found new lawyers and persuaded them to pursue the appeal, largely on the strength of the evidence that we had. They thought that there was a chance that the case could be brought to life because there was so much evidence for us.
Wouldn't hear it.
It's more complicated than that because they remanded the case. They threw the case out, most of the case out, but they left a little part. They sent it back to the judge, saying that we should have amended they should have allowed the judge, when he threw one of his decisions was at some point we could have done what's called amended the complaint. You can, when you have new stuff that comes out, you can amend the lawsuit or complaint. And although the trial was 3 months away, okay, he said amending the complaint on the eve of trial would prejudice Lockheed, although it was 3 months away. He called that on the eve of trial. So when we went to the Court of Special Appeal, they said, guess what? The judge should have allowed you to amend the complaint, okay? But if you read the opinion, it pretty much says Lockheed has done nothing wrong. So it's almost like to save face. God knows why. I don't know if I want to go into that.
I know what it is. It's to make them seem like they're at least partially impartial, even though they're not.
So it sent the case back to the trial judge. The trial judge, when he got the case back, he essentially parroted what the Court of Appeals had said, which is that Lockheed had done nothing wrong. So he could find no grounds to keep to reopen the trial, rather. And so he threw the case again. The lawyers who had taken the case didn't want to pursue it. They wanted money at this point in time, and we didn't have the money to do that. So again, I went to the best lawyers in America and found an attorney in Maryland called Steve Snyder, who is known for winning big jury verdicts in Maryland.
Far beyond the reaches of mortal man lives Snyder Man. Wherever justice and large jury awards are needed, Snyder Man won't be far away.
Same thing happened. We went to the judge. He said I have nothing else to add. We went to the Court of Special Appeal, which pretty much did the same, and the beat goes on. The Court of Appeals in Maryland refused to hear the case. And there is no opportunity now to go to the U.S. Supreme Court because there is no...
And the Maryland Supreme Court wouldn't hear it?
No.
So the case is dead?
Case is dead. No, the only thing left is the Russian case. Gee, it's nice to be out in the country for a change. What's the name of this horse? Durango. Hey, Durango, how are you? You seem to be happy. I forgot to mention to you that at some point in time, I can't remember exactly when, Aviv calls me suddenly one morning and says, Pierre, I think I can get you a settlement. Lockheed had sent signal through some attorneys in Washington whom I know, and I'm supposed to fly there and discuss it. So I thought, gee, maybe we should do it. So I called our attorneys. and told him about it. And they said, don't you do it. Tell him not to go because he's going to fall into a trap. And you would jeopardize the case, stay away from it. And I did. In hindsight, probably it was a wrong decision on my part. And from that day on, Aviv never called me anymore.
The last day I was deposed by the Nazi, Mr. Ingemann. I told him things he didn't even know himself. That the Arabs, that Mr. Ingemann at some point let go, and he said, well, Mr. Quintana is a national litigator. They call me Super Q, probably because I am Super Q. I'm sort of a genius. I'm sort of a genius. And cut!